My daughter canceled my ticket for a dream cruise we'd planned for years, and while I stood on the pier watching her hand my boarding pass to her wealthy father-in-law, she didn't even look me in the eye. But what she didn't know was that the entire trip was booked in my name, and the cancellation she thought she processed was just the beginning of a lesson she would never forget. Have you ever been pushed aside by the person you sacrificed everything for, only to realize you were just a placeholder until someone better came along? I need you to tell me honestly if I was the villain for how I handled this, or if I just finally gave my daughter the wake-up call she so desperately earned. It all started about 18 months ago when my daughter, Sarah, first brought up the idea of a massive family cruise to celebrate her 30th birthday and my upcoming retirement. I've worked as a nurse for 35 years, pulling double shifts and holiday rotations just to make sure Sarah never wanted for anything after her father left us when she was just 6 years old. We were always a team, or so I thought, and this cruise was supposed to be our we made it moment, a 21-day luxury voyage through the Mediterranean. I was the one who put down the initial $10,000 deposit, and because I had the high-tier loyalty status from years of smaller trips, I handled all the logistics, booking the grand suite for Sarah and her husband, Mark, and a connecting balcony room for myself. Everything was perfect until Mark's parents, Richard and Evelyn, entered the picture about 6 months ago. Richard is a retired corporate executive who breathes entitlement, and Evelyn is the kind of woman who treats a waiter like a personal servant. They had never shown much interest in me or my life, usually looking down at my blue-collar profession, but suddenly when they heard about the cruise, they were all over it. Sarah started dropping hints that the family dynamic would be so much better if Richard and Evelyn could join us, but the ship was fully booked. I told her I was sorry, but there was literally no room left on the vessel for new reservations. I thought that was the end of it, but Sarah's attitude began to shift. She became distant, snappy, and started complaining about how cramped it would be with me constantly hovering around her and Mark. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere grew increasingly toxic. Sarah would call me just to complain about how Richard and Evelyn were feeling left out, and how it was making things awkward at Sunday dinners with Mark's family. She started nitpicking my personality, telling me that I was too loud, or that my stories about the hospital were depressing and didn't fit the vibe of a high-end luxury cruise. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to pre-trip stress, but then came the night of the dinner, 2 weeks before the departure date. We were having dinner when Sarah dropped the bombshell with a coldness that made my blood run cold. She looked at me and said, "Mom, I think it's better if the cruise is canceled for you. Richard really needs the break after his health scare, and it just makes more sense for him to take your spot since he can offer Mark some career networking while they're on board." I sat there in stunned silence, my fork halfway to my mouth, as she explained that she had already switched the names on the ticket, and that she'd pay me back my portion of the fare eventually, though she knew I didn't really need the money as much as Richard needed the luxury. She didn't ask, she informed me. She treated my presence like an inconvenience she had successfully managed away. When I tried to protest, she told me I was being selfish and that a good mother would want her daughter to have the best possible experience. The betrayal stung more than the loss of the vacation. It was the realization that my daughter viewed me as a bank account and a backup plan. She even had the audacity to ask if I could still help out by watching their golden retriever while they were away, since I'd be free anyway. That was the moment something inside me snapped, but I didn't let it show. I didn't argue further that night. I went home, sat in my quiet living room, and looked at the confirmation emails. That's when I realized Sarah had made a massive mistake. Because I was the primary traveler and the one who paid the bulk of the costs, the name change she thought she had performed online was only a request that required my final authorization as the lead passenger. She had seen a pending status and assumed it was a done deal. She was so blinded by her desire to please her father-in-law that she didn't even check if the boarding passes were actually issued. I sat there in the dark, staring at my laptop screen, feeling the weight of 30 years of motherhood crashing down on me. I remembered the times I skipped meals so she could have the right brand of shoes, the times I worked 3 consecutive nights so she could go on her high school trips, and the way she was now tossing me aside for a man who hadn't even sent her a card for her birthday until she married his son. The nights leading up to the cruise were the hardest. I had to sit through a goodbye dinner, that Sarah insisted on, where she spent the entire time talking about the excursions she was going to take Richard on. She spoke about wine tastings in Tuscany and private tours of the Vatican, things she and I had researched together for months. Every time I tried to speak, she would cut me off saying, "Oh Mom, you wouldn't understand the level of detail Richard expects." Mark just sat there, looking like a whipped puppy, too afraid of his wife and his father to say a word in my defense. Evelyn even had the nerve to ask me if I could recommend a good brand of sunblock, because her skin was so much more delicate than mine. I smiled and nodded, playing the part of the heartbroken but compliant mother. I even helped Sarah pack her bags, folding her summer dresses with the precision of a surgical nurse, while secretly knowing she wouldn't be wearing them on any Mediterranean deck. I decided to wait. I let her go on believing she had successfully traded her mother for a man with a bigger portfolio. I watched her social media as she packed, posting photos of the big family trip, with captions about how blessed she was to have such sophisticated in-laws. She posted a photo of a new evening gown with the caption, "Getting ready for Captain's Night with the best family I could ask for." It was a direct slap in the face. She didn't call me once to check in. She didn't even send a text to apologize for the switch. She just moved on as if I had never been part of the plan. She even posted a countdown on her Instagram story, featuring a photo of Richard and Evelyn with the text, "Finally traveling with people who know how to live." I saw that while sitting in my kitchen drinking a cup of tea, and for the first time, I didn't feel sad. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. On the morning of the cruise, I actually drove to the port. I wanted to see it with my own eyes. I stayed back in the shadows of the terminal and watched as Sarah, Mark, Richard, and Evelyn pulled up in a town car. Sarah looked radiant, holding Richard's arm and laughing, while Evelyn carried a designer bag that probably cost more than my first car. I saw them approach the check-in desk with their luggage, expensive, matching leather sets. I saw the moment the smiles began to fade. The gate agent was shaking her head, pointing at the screen. Richard was gesturing wildly, his face turning a bright shade of purple that matched his silk tie. Sarah was frantically typing on her phone, likely trying to call me, but I had turned my phone off and left it in the glove box of my car. I stood there for a long time, watching the chaos unfold from a distance. Richard was shouting at the poor girl behind the desk, demanding to see a manager, while Evelyn was fanning herself as if she were about to faint from the indignity of standing in line. Mark was looking at the floor, clearly embarrassed, but Sarah just looked desperate. She was looking around the terminal, searching for me, realizing that the pending status had never turned into a confirmed status. She was realizing that the world didn't revolve around her demands. She began pacing the floor, her heels clicking loudly on the marble, her face a mask of panic. She tried to use Mark's phone to call me, then Richard's, but I had blocked all their numbers temporarily. I wanted her to feel that total isolation, the same isolation she tried to force on me. So that is the situation I was in. I was discarded like trash by my own child, so she could impress her wealthy in-laws with a trip I paid for. I had the power to fix it with one phone call to the cruise line. Or I could let the cancellation she started become a reality for everyone. Before I tell you what I did next and how the confrontation on that pier ended, I want you to pause and comment below. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have saved the day? Or would you have let them face the consequences of their own greed? I really want to know if you think I went too far. Now, as I watched Sarah break down in tears at the terminal, I realized I couldn't just walk away. I walked up to the desk, calm as a summer breeze, and the moment Sarah saw me, she let out a sob of relief. "Mom, thank God. Tell this woman there's been a mistake. They won't let Richard and Evelyn board. And now they're saying our suite is flagged too," she cried, grabbing my arm. Her grip was tight, desperate, as if she could pull the boarding passes right out of my pocket. I looked at the agent, then at Richard, who was huffing about calling his lawyer and threatening to sue the cruise line for emotional distress, and finally at my daughter. I didn't scream. I didn't cause a scene. I simply handed the agent my ID and said, "I'm the lead passenger. I'd like to officially cancel the entire reservation for the Grand Suite and the connecting room, effective immediately. Since we are within the 100% penalty phase for a voluntary cancellation, I understand the money is forfeit, but as the payer, I am exercising my right to deny boarding to the entire party." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's jaw dropped. Mark looked like he'd been slapped. Richard actually sputtered. "You can't do that. You're a nobody." I looked Richard dead in the eye and said, "This nobody paid for your bed, and now this nobody is taking it away." Evelyn tried to intervene, saying that they would reimburse me if I just let them board, but I laughed. I told her that if they could afford the reimbursement, they could afford to book their own trip on a different ship. I turned back to the agent and confirmed the cancellation. She looked at me with a mix of shock and secret admiration, then typed it into the system. Within seconds, their digital boarding passes on their phones turned red. Sarah started screaming that I was ruining her life, that she would never forgive me, and that I was a bitter, lonely woman. She called me every name in the book, right there in front of the entire terminal. She even tried to lung at me, but Mark had to hold her back. I told her that I'd rather be lonely and keep my dignity than be a mother who pays to be insulted. I told her that the networking Richard was going to provide could start right now. On the sidewalk. I walked out of that terminal while they were being escorted away by security, because they didn't have valid tickets and were causing a disturbance. As I walked to my car, I could hear Richard screaming about how he was going to destroy me. But I just kept walking. The aftermath was brutal. Sarah tried to blast me on Facebook, telling everyone I stranded her in a foreign city, even though we were still in our home state. But I simply posted the receipts of the $30,000 I had spent over the last year on her and the cruise, along with the text she sent me telling me I was replaced by Richard. I also posted the email showing she tried to change the names without my consent. The public opinion shifted instantly. Her friends, who had initially liked her post, started deleting their comments. Mark's parents were humiliated, and because Richard had bragged to all his friends about this exclusive trip, he had to explain why he was back home 12 hours later. He tried to sue me for the loss of a vacation, but his lawyer told him he had no case since he hadn't paid a dime. In fact, Mark's employer heard about the scene at the terminal, Richard's screaming and Sarah's meltdown. And Mark was passed over for a promotion because his judgment in family matters was questioned. Sarah didn't speak to me for months, but honestly, it was the most peaceful months of my life. I didn't have to listen to her complaints, I didn't have to fund her lifestyle, and I didn't have to feel like a second-class citizen in my own family. I eventually used the refund credit I managed to claw back through my travel insurance, which ironically, only covered me because I was the one who fell ill with the heartache of a betrayal, to take a solo trip to Japan. I spent 3 weeks exploring Kyoto and Tokyo, staying in 5-star hotels and eating at Michelin-starred restaurants, all with the money I had originally intended to spend on a daughter who didn't respect me. While I was in Japan, Sarah sent me a long, rambling email. She didn't apologize really. She just talked about how hard things had been since Richard and Evelyn were mad at her, and Mark for the embarrassment. They were blaming Sarah for not handling the mother correctly. She had the nerve to ask if I could help with her mortgage since the cruise money was gone anyway, and Mark's salary wasn't increasing as they'd planned. I didn't even reply. I just blocked her and went back to my sushi. I spent my afternoons in quiet temples and my evenings watching the neon lights of Shinjuku, finally enjoying the retirement I had worked so hard for. I met other travelers, people who valued my stories and didn't find my profession depressing. I realized that I had spent 30 years building a life for someone else, and it was finally time to build a life for me. When I returned, I sold my large house and moved into a beautiful, low-maintenance condo by the sea. I blocked Richard and Evelyn on everything, and I let Sarah know that any future communication would be strictly through a family mediator if she couldn't learn to speak to me with respect. I realized that day on the pier that you can't buy love, but you can certainly stop financing disrespect. I learned that being a parent doesn't mean being a doormat, and sometimes, the best way to love your child is to let them feel the cold world without your warmth to shield them. I'm retired now, and my life is full of people who actually want to be around me for who I am, not for what I can provide. Sarah and I are on low contact terms now, and she knows that if she ever wants a relationship with me again, it starts with an apology and a payment plan for the money she owes me. She's currently working a second job, just to keep up with the lifestyle she tried so hard to pretend she already had. Until then, She's just someone I used to know. If you think I was right to stand my ground and cancel that trip, make sure to like this video right now. If you've ever had a family member try to use you, subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story of justice and karma. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did Sarah deserve a second chance, or was the pier the perfect place to leave her? I'll see you all in the next story.